Well, hello, Dad.
Hi, Sam.
How you doing? You all right?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm good, thank you. So, obviously, we're here because you've got your brand new book. For those who haven't seen it, Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids. So, obviously, you've been writing this and researching this for quite a while now. So, I know we talked briefly about this as well over the summer. But for those who haven't watched this or watched that one, what was the inspiration behind writing the book?
I've always, as you know, I've always been into conspiracy theories, and of course, it's your grandfather that took me and you both down the path, and also got us both indirectly involved in Freemasonry. Although I know neither you or I attend anymore, but
Yes.
I grew up in a house, full of books to do with conspiracy theories, and I always had a keen interest, and that's something that you picked up from me and obviously Grandad. And I've read an awful lot of books. I think perhaps two of my favourite are From Atlantis to the Sphinx. That one is probably my favourite of them all, along with quite a few David Icke books that I've read that were my dad's. But From Atlantis to the Sphinx, I found particularly interesting, followed by the Book of Enoch. But I was always interested in Antarctica, the dark side of the moon, the Anunnaki, who built the pyramids, King Solomon, and obviously joining Freemasonry, I thought that would be my way in to getting this occult hidden history revealed to me and just a few others. But obviously, very quickly, I realised that you need to be an awful lot higher up the chain to get the real information. But the Tartaria subject, that didn't really enter my domain until we went into the lockdown in 2020. And I was watching a podcast by Max Egan, the Australian conspiracy theorist. He's done an awful lot of work on Tartaria and also done a lot to promote people's awareness for what's going on the Gaza Strip, and has been seen walking up and down that strip, showing people what's really going on there. So he introduced me to Tartaria, and I just thought that I was looking at an empire, a civilization that had been deleted from history. I had absolutely no idea that it was the biggest conspiracy of them all. And I also didn't know at the time, when I started delving, that I would be uncovering a reset, Nikola Tesla and his involvement, Napoleon, the Orphan train movement, and human cloning. I had no idea how big the Tartaria subject was, and the more I dug, the more information I found that just blew my mind, and I very slowly connected a lot of dots. And actually this morning on a podcast I did for an Australian channel on YouTube, I said something that I'd been keeping to myself for about 6 months now. But I'll tell you in a moment what that is. But yeah, so my interest really in Tartaria became more intense the more I dug and the more I found what they had done. Because it wasn't just wiping an empire out. In order to do that, they had to falsify history, change the date, and then repopulate. And it's how they did that. It's incredible. It's vast. It is a warren. It's not a rabbit hole. It's a warren. Yeah.
So because I've obviously got different points in your book that I want to go through, but before we go through that, what were you keeping to yourself then for quite some time?
Okay. Now, some of the groups I'm in on Facebook, and I'm a moderator on a couple of other groups, and they're a lot bigger than mine. I mean, mine's got 23,000 within it, but there's some that are approaching 250,000. And often I'll put something up, and someone will try and correct me by saying, "Stop calling it the Tartarian Empire. You're referring to the millennial reign of Christ." Now, I don't personally refer to Jesus as Christ. I think that's a different thing altogether. I think Christ is actually Christos, the fluid that runs from your pineal gland down your spine, the 33 vertebrae, that connects us to our God, or a higher being, a higher level of frequency, a higher level of intellect, a higher dimension, if you like. And I think that's why they refer to Jesus as Christ. But I've been digging, and every time someone's corrected me, I've thought about it, and I've thought, okay, they say that Jesus would reign for 1,000 years, and that we would have peace and harmony for 1,000 years. So, and obviously most people that have read a little bit more than the King James Bible perhaps read one that, if you can find one that was printed before 1775, or actually managed to get hold of, like the Book of Thomas and the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, and the Book of Jesus, and read through these, you'd see that Jesus' real name was Yeshua, which we would pronounce here Joshua, and he married, as you know, he was married or considered to have a partner, Mary Magdalene, and had children. Well, I looked at Genghis Khan, or Genghis, depending on where you are. Now, his father was called Yeshua. It also, in Hebrew, translates to the number 9. So, represents the number 9, the 3 to the power of 3. And so I started wondering whether or not Genghis Khan's father is Jesus. 1,000-year reign, the millennial reign of Christ. Genghis Khan's father is called Yeshua. Jesus was called Yeshua. The timeline that we live in has been falsified. So in 1776, they had added 800 years to our timeline. So if you take 800 years away from 1776 and look at the year they say Jesus was born, which obviously was in Americanisms 9/11, or the 11th of September, a very important date for a number of reasons.
Yes.
I've put 2 and 2 together, and I've either got 4 or I've got 5. Now, when I said this on this channel this morning, Tartaria Australia, the two presenters had this sort of light bulb moment and said, my God, that actually now makes a lot of sense. Some of the things I've been reading, some of the research I've done. And I said, it's just something that I've been thinking and looking into. But I think that Jesus died, or was killed, in 1776 when they wiped out the Tartarian Empire, and that Genghis Khan was his son. And that was who was out there. And I think that the narrative we've been told, that he was this warmonger, this savage man that went out there and raped and pillaged. I think because the narrative tells us that it's more likely that it's inverted.
Yeah.
And that actually everything that I've read that the Tartarians did, which are now called the Mongolian, we removed Tartarian and called it the Mongolian Empire. They were about peace and harmony and balance and raising your vibration and frequency, and about personal growth and healing. They were very spiritual people and believed in free travel and helping each other. And they built cathedrals to, cathode Rao. They built them to harness energy. So when you went in, your frequency was balanced, your chakras were balanced, and stained glass windows were made of crystal not glass. And again, balancing your chakra, and they had pipe organs, church organs, which were designed to heal your internal organs. This isn't a warmongering nation. This isn't what we've been led to believe. So I do personally think that everything is inverted. So if you look at the timeline of Jesus and then knock 800 years off the current year and say that 1776 was the end of the Tartarian Empire, also known as the millennial reign of Jesus, then it ties in quite well together. And also there's a lot of evidence that he was buried in Crimea. And as this Tartarian conspiracy has begun to be more and more exposed, we've seen more and more bombing in Crimea or Ukraine. And that does seem to follow a pattern when they found Gilgamesh's tomb in Iraq. Within days, it was the first site that they bombed when they invaded Iraq, the US. So I think when things are uncovered, they then will create a reason for a war there, and have always done that, to destroy as much evidence as possible, make it very difficult to find the truth behind these things, or any physical evidence. So that was what I said this morning, and what was supposed to be an hour ended up being 2 hours of talking, and they just wouldn't leave it alone. It was a little bit like I'd flicked a switch inside these two presenters who are very well respected, and they tour across Australia. They actually work with Max Egan. They're doing a tour here in the UK next year, which they've asked me to join them for a series of talks with. And for two people that are very well versed in this conspiracy, it was amazing to share just a personal thought with them. Don't get me wrong, Sam. That thought's backed up with an awful lot of reading and digging.
Oh yeah, I bet.
I didn't just come out of it with it. It blew their minds, and they are now convinced I'm right. So there you go. I think Jesus did live for 1,000 years. Obviously, I don't think that he was human like us by any stretch. I think he was, a giant of a man to start with, and I think he came from somewhere else. But then I think the Tartarians were different people to us as well. There's actually very little evidence that they even ate. They're often referred to as breatharians.
I think you've mentioned giants as well, didn't you, in the book about them? That's what they were. Yeah,
I believe so. And there is a lot of evidence that actually they didn't eat. That a little bit like a plant or a tree, that they got their sustenance through the ether.
That's interesting.
Chlorophyll. Yeah, so the same as a plant. So there's a race of people, and their name escapes me, that were documented as being from Asia in mythology, that didn't actually have mouths. And they actually got every nutrient they needed by inhaling. So they would inhale, they would carry herbs and spices and certain things, and they would inhale that. So there's in quite a few cultures, people talk about races that did not eat. Well, that would explain why you would spend an incredible amount of time and at that period money building these most magnificent structures throughout the world, these palaces and castles and cathedrals, and not put a toilet in. And the narrative will tell us that you defecated into a bucket and threw it out the window into the street. Well, they're the people that wore the most elegant clothes and were quite sophisticated at a time where we were discovering classical music and opera and the arts. Yet we're expected to believe that they didn't care what they did with their waste, with human waste. I'm on the fence with it, but there's very little evidence to back up why all of a sudden we started having toilets. Now, I know they say the Romans invented the toilet and the sewer and so on, but I don't actually believe that. And there are a lot of people out there, that John Hamer being one, who wrote a fantastic book called The Falsification of History, which actually I've a signed copy of. I know John, and oddly enough, Grandad has a copy of it as well, just coincidentally. He says the Roman Empire never existed, that they've just put these things in place to give us a backstory for certain buildings and certain things that have happened. And of course, the person ultimately that people like me and John look to is Anatoly Fomenko, who first started to look at chronology and the timeline. So, Breatharians is what they're called.
Yeah, I've heard of that name before.
Yeah.
It does seem...
But yes, I think... Sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, yeah. So if you look... you can even Google this. And I know Google's not the best place in the world to get anything true from. But I do sometimes refer people to Google, because if anybody's going to lie and cover something up, it's going to be Google. But if you could just type in to Google, how tall was Noah? How tall was Moses? They'll tell you 10, 12 feet. It's there. So these people were huge. And I think some of them were a lot bigger than that. And hence the size of the ceilings and doorways. These buildings, built at a time when we apparently didn't have very good heating. Why would you build a room with such high ceilings where it's going to be even harder to warm the room, to heat the room? And why such big doors? Who are they expecting to come through it? So I think a lot of these buildings were built by giants for giants. And throughout history, I think that, the narrative is that people used to be a lot shorter than us. Well, if history's inverted, then I'd imagine people used to be a lot taller than us. And so that's what I think. But yeah, quick Google on how tall was Moses, how tall was Noah, and you'll see for yourself, these people were huge, twice the size of us.
Yeah.
Easily twice the size
I've heard
of us.
they're like 12 feet. I've seen some stuff about that. And it's interesting when you say everything's inverted, because you're normally told about with the giant doors or giant buildings and how tall they are. It's meant to represent how powerful or how their status is normally what it's told with. The bigger the door, the higher the status they have. But then you're just thinking, like you say, everything's inverted. They're probably not telling the truth. And there's something else going on deeper. And I think a lot of people need to look at the Book of Enoch. It's a really interesting book that I think the Ethiopian Bible still includes in theirs.
Yeah.
And it's interesting why other Bibles don't have that. It's what they're trying to hide. And another point you've mentioned as well about Jesus and the story about him. It's like when I was looking into Freddie Silver and the Knights Templar, and he gives you a completely different story to what we're actually told. Again, what we're normally told doesn't always appear to be the truth. It always seems to be just misleading us, and for the elites, just more control from them. They're the ones that like to control everything. But I wanted to ask in particular, because obviously we see history always seems to be rewritten, or like changes happen, or like you've mentioned, 800 years were added onto the timeline. Why do you think the 800 years in particular? Is it because they don't want us to know what's really going on? Is there too much happening within that time with the Tartarian Empire? Why the 800 years?
Why 800 years specifically?
Yeah.
I don't know why they picked exactly 800 years. But the reason for doing it is because they want us to believe that we started off as very primitive and slowly evolved, and building techniques and technology slowly evolved to bring us up to the current day and what we're capable of doing. But and by doing that, and by saying that having these buildings, I mean, look at Bath, for example, in England, and we've got these these Greco-Romanesque style buildings. So the backstory is that in some parts of the world, they'll say that these people were huge fans of the style, yet hadn't travelled to Rome or Greece. So the next best thing to come up with here in England and across Europe is to say, well, the Romans invaded and the Roman Empire was in power and they built all of this stuff. And then we've copied and mimicked it. So you've got this slow evolution of build, 1 minute we're in a mud hut and slowly we build from stone and timber and then marble and granite and then these incredible buildings with colossal pillars. So we've got this evolution. What they don't want to tell you is that the civilizations before us, and perhaps the very first people, the intelligent, sentient people to live on this planet, as far as we know, were perhaps the Anunnaki. Now, their technology was far more superior to anything we have in the public domain today. I don't doubt that their descendants still have this technology. But if we're going to go back 250,000 years ago to when they started mucking around and making us, the technology they had was more superior than what we're aware of exists now. And they want us to believe that we evolved. And by clumping 800 years onto our timeline, you can add periods where very little happened and call it the Dark Ages. And then you can add these other eras in. And then you've got this slowly developed race of people called humans. What they don't want you to know is that the previous civilization to us, the Tartarians, were far more advanced than we are. They understood their real purpose. They understood their connection and relationship with the ether and with Gaia and with every living matter on the planet. They understood that far better than us. And every now and again, every 250 years, the elite, or the parasites, as I like to call them, because they are by definition a parasitic race of people, they'll wipe us out. And the reason they do that is greed and control. There's no profit to be made from giving people free energy. And there's no control over allowing people to travel freely. And the Tartarians are known also, that period of time in the empire is known as the Empire of Free Travel. And people used airships. There were no passports. There was no money. It was all done on barter. And people traded. And very greedy group of people that, as you know, descend from Amun-Ra and the Anunnaki, or Marduk, whatever you want to call Amun-Ra, the person you're saying amen to when you go to church. They descend from him, and they have a habit of wiping us out when we get a little bit too big for our own boots and we become too powerful. And I think that my fear is that these resets that occur, and these great resets, which are every 250 years, a sort of culling period, we're going through one now, and anybody can find that out by just going on the World Economic Forum's website.
Yeah, you can see it's happening.
Yeah, but my fear with this reset is that they won't need to repopulate to the extent that they have done in the past this time, because they've got AI almost where they need it. So you're not going to need as many people. So many things are automated now. Well, back at the last reset, they weren't. And all of a sudden, if you look at the Industrial Revolution, for example, you'll see that farms and mills and factories and mines are full of children. And there's a specific reason for that. There weren't any adults. These children did not have parents. Their parents aren't there. This was a repopulation program called the Cabbage Patch Babies. So that's why they do it, Sam. In a nutshell, they wipe us out when we get to a point where we become too powerful, too aware, or we've got it too good. Now, you could argue that they wanted to get rid of certain things because they weren't profiting from them, so they got rid of Rockefeller campaign to get electric vehicles banned, 100 years ago. and the New York Police Department was running electric vehicles. The post office were running electric vehicles. Buses in London were electric. He got them boycotted because of the petroleum. He was making a lot of money, wanted to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Him and Henry Ford unite and start profiting from the from gas, oil, petroleum as energy. But of course, now with fiat currency, where you can just, these people are more than capable of logging on and putting a couple of zeros on their bank balance. It doesn't matter. They no longer need to do that. So they don't need us. They don't need our money. I think this reset now is going to be very different to the one before, unless we can turn the tables.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You can sort of see when we get too big for our boots, as they probably would say, then they have to come and step on us, bring us down. I always like to bring up the example of like the Library of Alexandria and how that was torn down or burnt somehow, even though it was made of stone. So it's quite interesting how that was burnt down from the inside, most likely. And then they've taken all the certain scriptures or scrolls that they needed. And you can see, people can look this up. You go look at the Vatican vaults and see what's all the stuff hidden down there. All these scriptures and old scrolls, but no one's allowed to see them. It's kind of like only the elite, only those in charge or those who are powerful enough are the ones that are able to see this, when really knowledge should be for everyone. But if everyone had the knowledge, then we wouldn't need the elites. And then another reset would probably have to start again, where only they have the knowledge and the power. So I want to get on to more of your book now, because we talked about the Tartarian Empire and who they are. We've talked a little bit who they are, what they did with the healing, and how they're really connected with the earth. But how did the Tartarian Empire begin? How did it sort of come about?
Well, the Tartarians, you can trace them all the way back to Noah's grandchildren. That's how far back it goes, but they've been known as different things. But Tartarian, and what I'm talking about, the Tartarians and the conspiracy surrounding the Tartarians, is 1,000 years. It's a reign of 1,000 years. Now, the Tartarians were a race of people. It is Grand Tartary, Great Tartary, Chinese Tartary, really that sort of spun the Far East going into Russia and then started to spread into Eastern and then Western Europe. And then their philosophy, their style, their culture, their way of building, their technology, that then spread across the world. In America, they were called the Moors. So there are different people within it. So it's not specifically how long were these people around for, because they go all the way back to the very beginning, to the very first Tartarians, if you like, because they also say that King Solomon was
he's a leader, wasn't he?
Yeah, perhaps the first king or ruler of the Tartarians. So I think that the Tartarians are what we are calling a race of people, when actually it goes back right to the very beginning. And we have a period of 1,000 years where they were dominant, the dominant race, if you like. But I think it's not specifically a bunch of people. I think it encompasses lots of different cultures, lots of different races and creeds and colours throughout the world. But the original Tartarians themselves go back to biblical times, and you're talking about giants. Now, these giants along the way have, what's the correct way of putting this? Mated or reproduced with other races of people. And you end up with all different sorts of shapes and sizes. And a little bit like today, where we're a little bit more multicultural. So I think it's the same thing, really. But the period of time when they were at their peak, if you like, with regard to their technology and their way of building, that was 1,000 years. So that goes from 1776. But at 1776, of course, you've got to knock 800 years off that. and take it to 976. So you've got a period. So let's say really what we're looking at is the year zero for the first 1,000 years.
Right.
And until quite recently, because if you follow Anatoly Fomenko's timeline and the timeline I've gone with, a lot of people that research this, the year is currently 1224, not 2024. So you think Jesus was here wandering around until relatively recently.
It's interesting when you think about it like that as well. And it's because, well, I wanted to ask about obviously them being advanced as they were on a spiritual level, as well as a technological level, and being able to heal themselves using the frequency and vibration. They knew about ley lines and where they were. And obviously you mentioned about the Anunnaki. Is that how they've gotten the knowledge to know what to do and how to do it? Or what do you think? How do they know all of this? Is it from the Anunnaki?
Yeah. And when we say Anunnaki, I mean Anunnaki. I'm not a huge expert on the Anunnaki. I'm sure you know much more than I do about them. But as far as I'm aware, Anunnaki just means people that came from the sky. So there wasn't a specific. I mean, we know that really when we're reading the Bible or talking about the Bible that God. Originally, up until 1775, God was actually a group of people. It was a plural.
Yes.
And we're talking about Enki and Enlil and people like that. So yes, for want of a better term, this is information that's shared. And after, of course, after the big deluge, the flood, which was a reset, where the gods were unhappy, so flooded the bloody planet to get rid of us all for our sins and, what we had sinned for. I've absolutely no idea. But so a lot of cultures say that people came from the sky, people came from the sea, and they introduced technology to them, mathematics, writing, money, education, and then taught them how to build, but how to build following constellations and ley lines, the geomagnetic pulse and veins and vibration, if you like, of the planet itself, and how to work in harmony with that. And I think this information was, as I think Graham Hancock, or perhaps more so Freddie Silver would say, and Billy Carson too, that this information was taught to us by who we refer to as the Anunnaki. But in different races, they're called different things. I think there's one race in South America that called them the Ant People. Some of them, the depictions of these people, I think because in some areas they were said to have come out of the sea. They've got them as sort of half fish, half man. And obviously with the Egyptian times, we've got some of these deities with the head of a dog or the head of an eagle, and so I believe those are just helmets. They're just helmets, but this information was passed to us, and apparently every 3,600 years, their planet Nibiru comes back in alignment with ours, and they visit us, and it causes a few problems. I think it causes a bit of disturbance with our planet, but they hop in and give us another push along and share information with us and share technology with us. So yeah, that's what I think, Sam.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially about, I think when you look at different people talking about these higher beings or aliens, what people want to call them, people from elsewhere, just those who are more intelligent and those who have reached a higher sort of level of civilization, they always talk about how to reach it. You need to have love, you need to have harmony, you need to have peace within your society. So the sharing of knowledge, it totally makes sense. I do believe as well, I mean, for example, just look at the pyramids, I think, and how they're all over the world. Some people may not realize this. You go anywhere, near enough any continent, you will see pyramids, you will find them there. So it does seem to be a sharing of knowledge. And as we're not even able to recreate them now, it does seem like some sort of high being, some sort of higher civilization has taught us and shared their knowledge with us. Because you can't just go from hunter-gatherer times to being able to build the pyramids. And as we know of history being rewritten, it seems more likely than not that the pyramids are a lot older than we're originally told. So
Yeah.
I wanted to.
Do you,
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, do you know much about the bent pyramid? That it's scorched and some of the blocks are black and they found nuclear glass in the sand around it.
No, I don't think I have. Where is this? Not Egypt, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, the bent pyramid. So some of the blocks have been blown quite far into the desert, and they've found nuclear glass there. The same glass that's found when they've carried out nuclear testing, when they were testing nuclear bombs. That's the only time you see this glass. I can't remember the name of it, but it's called something like trinomite or something like that.
Right.
Tritonite, possibly. And that's evidence that there has been a nuclear attack in Egypt. So I think that what we're talking about direct energy weapons, and that they've been using them for some time.
Yeah, I think Billy Carson's talked about it as well. When he was on Joe Rogan podcast, he said, I can't remember the area where it was. People can go watch the episode when Billy went on to Joe Rogan, but there's this town or city, I think it's a town, but you can see that people have been turned into stone, and there's so much radiation there. And from how long ago it was, it seems like you're saying there does seem to be nuclear wars that's of higher power or higher beings from so long ago that we haven't really looked into. We don't really know what's going on there. So
yeah, I agree.
So I've got something on here which I found was quite interesting. I wanted to get into this I want to talk about the architecture and the buildings from the Tartarian Empire. You've mentioned as well, I'm fairly sure you mentioned it in the book, but I remember on your Facebook page, the Great Wall of China or the Great Wall of Tartaria. So this seems to have been built not by China, but as a defense against China by the Tartarians. What?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you get into that? Why was that?
Yeah. So it's facing the wrong way. So if you look at the Great Wall of China, then the fortresses along it can only be accessed from the other side. And the outposts and the positions you would use as a lookout or to fire from all face China. So I believe that was put up, as do a lot of people that have looked into this. I believe that was put up to keep the Chinese out of the Tartarian Empire. They were once part of it, but
what happened?
I don't know. I don't know what happened because they were known as Chinese Tartary.
Right.
But slowly, the Tartarian Empire lost ground and were thrown out of certain countries. And I think this is where the warmongering bit comes into it. But like I said, it's round the other way. These are people. In theory, Genghis Khan is trying to go out there and rape and pillage and take over as much land and as many countries as possible. But I think actually it's the other way round. He was protecting what remained of the Tartarian Empire as regard to land mass, not the people and the culture, but the actual area, Grand Tartary. I think he's protecting that, and that wall was put up to keep them out. And you can look, people, you'll often see, I mean, I think you could probably type this into YouTube or Google or BitChute and see the Great Wall of Tartaria. If you type that in, you'll see that you'll probably get quite a few threads on that, probably Reddit and things like that. But it's facing the wrong way round. And I don't believe that the Tartarian were warmongers. I don't believe Genghis Khan, the Mongolian Empire, I don't think that they were the people we've been led to believe. And they were keeping once the Chinese had claimed China, they stopped them going any further. And it was a defensive fortification, if you like, to basically watch over them and make sure they didn't go any further.
It's a great little theory that is as well. Great little theory for people to look into as well, I think, being especially Genghis Khan and the Great Wall of Tartaria or China. People will know it as now. I think, yeah, like you say, everything seems to be inverted these days with history. It all just seems to be rewritten. And as you've also written in your book, it's not always history, it's his story. It's not, it's always the victors that write about it, never the losers or those who've died. With talking about architecture now, because I've heard about this, I could be completely wrong, but I wanted to ask you about some other examples of buildings from the Tartarian Empire that are still around today, because I've heard, again, I could be wrong, I could have misread this or could just be false, but the US Capitol building is actually part of it, is a Tartarian building.
Yeah. And really anything, Sam, anything you look at, I would state that anything that was built pre-1900, and this is where they start, the late 1800s is where they start to come out with these amazing narratives. If they're that Greco-Roman style, then they are built in the Tartarian way of building and built by people who are either Tartarian, part of the Tartarian Empire, or working with the Tartarians and following their philosophy. So in America, let's take, for example, let's take the White House, for example. Now, obviously, that looks very similar to the Vatican in many ways. And there are a lot of buildings. There's one in Venezuela that looks very similar, and they're all over the world. Now, that's a specific way of building. And originally, the way that they would harness energy from the ether was it would have a copper-domed roof. That inside they have a capacitor resonator, and they would store energy in mercury tanks with copper rods. They would store energy, and that's how they harnessed energy and then distributed it. So that way of building is very specific to Tartarians, and we would call it Gothic Revival, Greco-Roman, and also you'll find that a lot of older buildings. So if you look at buildings that have been demolished, the Waldorf Astoria in New York, for example, is another classic example. This building goes up for literally 5 minutes, and then is knocked down to make way for something else. So often, the way to find a Tartarian building, twofold. First of all, if it's an old building and it's still in use and still looking pristine, then it will be probably repurposed for government use. Regardless of what country we're talking about, it will be a government use building. Or a bank, often a bank, but it will be typically a government use. If it's not government use, then it'll either fallen into disrepair or certain parts of it will have been removed. And this is usually the ether harnessing equipment that's on the rooftop. So they'll have removed spires. So you'll find perhaps in your local area, wherever anybody is, if they can find a really early picture, I'm talking around taken around the dawn of photography, as we've been told, of their local town hall or the oldest building that they can find, even the church. If they look at a photograph of the roof, look at the roof and then look at it now, and they'll find that the roof will have changed. A lot of the buildings have been reclad. A lot of them have been burnt down and destroyed, fires and floods. And you said earlier on about the Library of Alexandria. You know, how do you burn rock? Well, the temperature needs to be pretty high, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we're going to go back to direct energy weapons again. And that leads us into, and this is worth the people watching this having a quick look on the internet or on YouTube at meltology. Meltology is the process of melting rock. And there are a lot of buildings and castles out there where you can see they appear to be melted into the rock around them. Now, if we take, for example, Jordan, and we can say, well, you know, they carved the most incredible structure into the rock face there. It could be argued that actually they didn't. There was a magnificent building there that was melted, and the rock around it melted. And these can be found in a lot of places throughout the world. And there's a person who's got a podcast channel calls himself Mud Fossil University, and he's been looking into this for years. So it's some of them have been destroyed through fire and flood and literally direct energy weapons where necessary to get the temperature. I mean, look at what they did at Dresden by bombing, carpet bombing to the extremity that they did at the end of the Second World War. The temperature got to hot enough to melt brick, and people were turned into liquid. They were liquefied. That's the sort of temperature we're talking about. So they can achieve it, and have achieved it. So so that's what I think.
I was gonna say, because I'd noticed you had talked a bit in your book about Dresden as well, and it's in Germany, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So it seems Germany in particular, as we know with the World War II as well, supposedly. But there seems to be they were too technologically advanced, I think, Germany. And that's probably why they wanted to go after them as well. And there seems to be a bit of still quite a lot, because as we've mentioned as well, as you've mentioned, like with the destruction of old world Tartaria, towns and cities have been destroyed by the war. They were targeted due to still operating under the Tartarian Empire of free energy.
Yeah, and obviously their refusal to stop doing that, and people, greedy people, the same people all over again, because obviously with the First World War, ultimately it might have been Cecil Rhodes and his friends that started it, but financially backing it was the Rothschilds, and it's always the same people. So, and then of course, you could argue that obviously Hitler was a Rothschild, but his mother didn't marry one; she was a maid working for Solomon. So I wonder whether or not he had an axe to grind with the Jewish banking cartel, because he found out who his real father was. But he certainly didn't come from money. I mean, he was destitute at one point. He was living on the streets, a struggling artist, and So I don't know what his beef was really, but I do know that he did improve the economy, and he got Germany out of a recession after the First World War and was recovering. And because they were recovering so well, they decided to give the Germans another whack. And I believe the First World War, this is documented, that the fear was that the Germans were far too technologically advanced, and they were going to become a superpower, and it was going to be a Germanic empire. And that was Dresden and Berlin in particular were Tartarian strongholds. They were very significant Tartarian cities. And then, of course, you've got Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the Japanese islands. These were Tartarian islands, still running off Tartarian energy harnessing equipment, using cymatics in their buildings. It was all about frequency, balancing your chakras and so on. They didn't want that. But in Berlin, they had a garden called the Tiergarten, where you could walk your pets around and their internal organs would be healed just by how they had landscaped the gardens. So the frequency of the earth, using ley lines or geomagnetics, just by literally walking your pet around the gardens there, they could be healed of lots of different ailments. So nobody wanted that. There's no money in that, so they had to get rid of it. Either they got rid of the Germans before this Tartarian technology way of life continued, because several countries were still using it. They either had to get rid of it, or there was never going to be much of a need for petroleum. And I think obviously petroleum is also used in pharmaceuticals, which is what it gave the original boom was as a direct result of that. And they, Rockefeller campaigned to get alternative medicines outlawed. So I think it's that's greed. That the whole of the First World War was caused by greed within the British Empire.
Yeah, I think you've also mentioned as well about the Napoleonic Wars and how they were sort of planned, basically just to wipe out the Tartarian people and the cities and towns that were still left
Yeah.
as well. Just a side question, well, side point, because you always, well, there appears to be lots of tunnels everywhere under the ground and everything like that. But are the Tartarians involved in building these as well? Or does this go back
I don't
before
know.
them?
I think they're a lot older than that, and I think that they're still being used today. So
Oh, yes, I
some
do.
people would, yeah, and it depends, doesn't it, who you're talking to, what answer you'll get, or what theory you'll get. But I believe that ultimately the tunnels, there are two types of tunnel. One is that people have had to go underground at various points when there have been direct energy weapons attacking, or what we would call nuclear wars, holocausts, or whatever. I think when that's happened, people have had to go underground, and they've been doing that for a very, very long time. But there are also tunnels that they say go into inner Earth, if there is such a place as Agartha. That a lot of these tunnels, that's where they link to. So I think there's perhaps two different reasons for them. But a lot of cities and towns have tunnels underneath them, and the narrative with that is that they're often used to escort prisoners or to move documents from a court to another building and so on. But I don't believe that.
No, it's
I believe
unlikely.
that they're actually there. Yeah, they serve a different purpose, and I think that they are to house or move certain people should there be some form of nuclear attack.
Yeah, I would say so.
That's what I think. But there's also the Agartha thing, and what is interesting is if you look at, say, for example, we've got Donald Trump back in office now. I don't know if you've heard of the book The Adventures of Baron Trump.
Yes.
The giant that goes off looking for Agartha and finds it. He finds his way into the inner Earth. Interesting, isn't it? That it's The Adventures of Baron Trump. That Donald Trump's uncle finds the documents and keeps hold of them from Nikola Tesla when he died on time travel. And you've got his sidekick, his number one fan and right-hand man, Elon Musk, with his company called Tesla. And I just keep wondering about those things and trying to sort of gel them together. Is there something there? Does Donald Trump have Tesla's paperwork on time travel? Is he sharing that with Elon Musk? Is Elon Musk actually Nikola Tesla? And all of these things keep going around in my head.
It's interesting to think about, though. I mean, I think you've also seen this as well about Donald Trump bringing back the world fairs. Which you've mentioned as well about in your book, and about how the architecture of the Tartarian people and the empire was there.
And I mean that's some people, some of these incredible cities. They say, well, they were made out of plaster and paper mache. Oh, come on. It's not possible, because in lots of parts of the world, there are remnants of the world fairs. Some of the buildings still remain. But the interesting thing with the world's fairs is so many of them had fires just shortly after the events were over. They'd have a fire. And the fire was always accidental. Tramps, I think they said some tramps caused one. A cow knocking over a candle caused another one. And again, we're talking here about burning down an entire city.
Yeah.
A little bit like the Great Fire of London, which, if our history has been altered, and I believe by 800 years, but with regard to architecture and dates that are actually stamped, easier to put a 1 in front of it than start removing 800 years. That requires a little bit more work. So if we look at the Great Fire of London in 1666, and we take the 1 off the front and start thinking about the fact that the elite work with these very specific numbers, 3, 6, 9, 11, it starts to tie in. And again, the narrative behind that, how the fire started, We're talking about burning down one of the biggest cities at the time in the world, and still today, by someone knocking over some. Oh, come on! And burning brick. I think they always find that the reason for somewhere being destroyed is an accidental fire. Always. And I think once you start digging and looking into it, I mean, even if you don't dig and you just type into Google all of the world fairs that happened from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, just make a note of them all and then type in what happened. And you'll find that all of them, pretty much all of them, were destroyed by fire. We had it here, Crystal Palace, Alexandra Palace, where they moved the World's Fair to. Fire, followed by another fire, followed by another fire. Now, what are they doing? How do they keep having all of these fires all over the world that they're destroying? They're saying that this was only temporary. It was just built for an event to show you what we're capable of doing, to introduce new technology and to show people the latest inventions and so on. And then accidentally it burns down before people start prodding and having a look around. And of course, these are often in areas where they weren't actually inhabited. There was not much of a population. The place had just been reset. You can find photographs of these areas, these cities that these world fairs took place in, and see that the streets were empty. They had just wiped out the previous civilization. New people are introduced. And you'll see when you look at the world's fairs, look at the photographs of the world's fairs from late 1800s, early 1900s, and tell me how many children you can see in the photos. The answer is none. And when you look at the first early narrated movie by Alice Guy, the French pioneer.
Yes, I've got that down here.
Yeah, you got the Cabbage Patch Fairy and the midwife to the upper classes. If you look at the way that they're handling the babies and the way this couple that come in to buy a baby look at the babies and are interacting with them, these look to me like people who haven't held or seen a baby before.
Yeah, and she's got that film, I don't know the actual, I know it's a different language, but The Fairy of the Cabbages, is that what it's called? Yeah. And the fairy plucks the fairy plucks newborn babies from cabbages in a garden.
Yeah.
It seems
suspicious. And she picks them up by their limbs. They're being picked up by their limbs screaming. You can see they're in distress. These look like people who haven't handled babies or interacted with babies before. So I think that you've got two things going on. You've got people who survived all of the wars, the fires, the floods, the Napoleonic Wars, the war in America the Napoleonic Wars end, and then immediately in 1812 we're over in America. The British are now over there busy killing everybody there. The population that was left that would comply appear to be adults. There don't appear to be any children of the Tartarian Empire. Now, I don't know what that means, but there doesn't appear to have been children within that civilization. I think it's because people lived for a lot longer. And there are also people that would argue that no one actually had sex. There was no reproduction going on. By not having sex, you stayed pure and you were able to ascend a lot easier. And that we can start talking, about masturbation and losing your connection and so on. And pornography obviously being something that really is designed actually to keep you in a lower vibration.
Yeah.
And things like that. But, don't want to go down that one. But there is... It looks like it is possible that the Tartarian Empire, the people were adults, there were no children, simply because they lived a lot longer. And once they died, they died. I'm talking about maybe anything up to, several hundred years old, and then died. And there was nothing to replace them. That was it. So where they came from, I don't know. How were they produced? I don't know, but I think we've got to look at cloning. I think we've constantly got to look at cloning. I think these people are churned out, just like they repopulated with the incubator babies after the last reset. So if you look at these photos of the World's Fairs, you won't find a child there. And all of a sudden, you've got these children appearing, these Cabbage Patch babies appearing in this first narrated movie by Alice Guy Blanche. And the actors in it clearly don't appear to have seen a baby before, certainly not held one. So that's something to look at. Whenever anybody, if you go onto Google, go onto YouTube and type in the World's Fairs, maybe look at the Chicago World Fair or the Paris World Fair or even the London World Fairs. I mean, they were everywhere. They had them in bloody Samoa. They had them in New Zealand, Australia. They had one in Tasmania. Everywhere in the world had a World's Fair. And you won't see any children, not a single child. Yet in America, for example, at the Colombian World Fair, they say that a quarter of the population of the country attended. Now, where did they stay? That would be my first question.
Yeah, all them people.
Yeah, where did they stay? But there doesn't appear to be any children, and the children appear to have popped up almost overnight through a reproduction program known as the Cabbage Patch Babies.
Now, I do want to touch.
So there you go.
I do want to touch into the Cabbage Patch Babies as well. I've got some stuff down here for that. Excuse me. But just one last bit about like the destruction and the fall of the Tartarian Empire. Because obviously we mentioned fires, we mentioned like war and cities being destroyed and towns, but you've also mentioned mud floods. If we can get onto that a little bit and what you found about that. Because I don't know if that's planned or not, if that's something that occurred. So yeah, let's get into that. Because I'd imagine it.
No, that's planned.
Yeah, I'd imagine it is planned, knowing our society, knowing the elites.
Yeah, very, very much planned. Again, I believe direct energy weapons, and literally causing enough damage to cause. I mean, in America, for example, we were seeing, or they were seeing at the time, the tops of mountains where there was snow on mountain tops actually melting at such a speed and such a temperature that we're talking about a deluge, really, and picking up mud as it goes along and burying buildings in several feet, often a lot more than that, in mud, which very quickly solidifies. And they had to dig out these cities. And again, that's something else people can have a look at. There's quite a few pictures out there of people digging out houses, and you'll see evidence of it everywhere. So these floods are so powerful, they don't appear to be natural at all. They've had floods everywhere. These great floods. So you've got several pronged attack, really. You're having civil wars, the Napoleonic Wars, the set of 4 Napoleonic Wars, and civil wars all across the world where they get rid of people. You've then got fires in nearly every major town and city in the world, having a significant fire, destroying a lot of property, and then you've got floods burying as much as they can of what's left. And these mud floods are caused, and it is by a very, very quick process of melting. Literally, I think one of the most significant ones was in America, and it often follows some sort of weird anomaly. For example, there was a quake in America, and for it's completely escaped me where this was, but there was a quake, and it was near the Mississippi, and this quake followed by a mud flood, a huge deluge, and the power, they say, of this particular quake was so intense and so powerful that it actually managed to get the Mississippi to change direction, and people that had metallic objects, these metallic objects were flying across the room. So let's say cutlery,
Yeah.
Anything made of metal was literally flying across the room. Everything became magnetized. Wild animals were coming in. They became immediately domesticated, coming into people's homes and looking for shelter because they were scared. And domestic pets were becoming actually quite aggressive. And these again, I think, are the result of direct energy weapons. So you've got quite a lot going on to, I suppose, maximize and make as much damage as possible.
Yeah.
So the mud floods is a deluge. Initially, it's water, melt water, but at such a speed and such a temperature that it is melting mud and really putting several feet. And the evidence of this can be easily seen in most places, because you'll walk past an old building and you'll see a window in the pavement, the bottom, what appears to be a window peeking out of a basement or a cellar. Well, they'll say, well, that was to let light into a cellar. No, that's not to let light into a cellar. If you go into the cellar, if you can go into one of these buildings, the window is actually a normal sized window with just a small piece peeking out. That isn't how you would do it. And cellars are notorious for damp, for rot and mold. It's not somewhere that you would normally, they're not the best places in the world to do anything with, frankly. They cause more problems. So why would you build down and not up? And they repurposed windows and put doors in. So often these old buildings, what was the basement was the original ground floor. And that's evidence of a mud flood in your local town.
That's interesting, because you do see it a lot everywhere, especially here in the UK. You can see it in certain old towns and villages. That's a really interesting thought. That's a really interesting concept as well to think about, because it does make sense, especially when you look in London and you see all these houses and stuff like that, all these buildings, and like you say, the windows are only partially being seen on the bottom.
Yeah,
it does seem like we have risen the floor, I guess you could say, the pavements, the roads. This all seems to be risen up, and just
and often you'll see steps. There'll be steps going up to the front door of a building. You wouldn't do that. You've instantly made it a lot harder for people that are frail, the elderly, for moving goods in and out of a building, furniture and so on. You've instantly made that a lot harder. Why would you do that? Why would you have a series of steps, several feet high, to get in and out of your front door? There's no logic behind doing that. We don't do it now. And that's because that particular building with a few steps up to it wasn't quite buried at the right level. So you've got the little windows peeking out the bottom, but to use a window aperture and a floor for the first floor to become the ground floor, you're going to need to get to a front door and a floor level without doing an awful lot of work. So the easiest way to do that is to put a door where a window once was and to put steps up to the door. Because when these mud floods happen, they're not going to happen at a specific height that makes it convenient enough for everybody's first floor to suddenly become the ground floor. There's going to be several feet to play with in either direction.
So on to the next point now, which is where we've covered it a bit, but Cabbage Patch Kids. So the term Cabbage Patch Kids, or babies, from what you've said and from what I've read on your book, it appears to have come from an old Slavic folklore. Is that?
Yeah.
That's interesting how it's come from there. So why do you think, what's the connection between that? It's a story, I think, on there or something.
There is, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of Slavic folklore behind that. I mean, first of all, you've got the Stork. Now, that's a story by Hans Christian Andersen, and they used to say that the babies were delivered by storks. That's worth looking into.
Yeah, I've heard
but
that.
the Cabbage Patch, now, my mother, your grandmother, she was told by her brother and sister, who are quite a bit older than her. She popped along as a surprise after the Second World War. She was told that she was found in the bottom of the garden in the vegetable patch. Now, I think that actually goes back a lot further. So in Slavic folklore, what they used to say was, that little boys came from cabbages and little girls came from roses. And that's how they were made. They were actually made from seeds. And by adding the seed of a cabbage, you got a boy. When you threw that into the mix, and adding the seed of a rose, you got a girl. And that is the repopulation. But I think the reason that they use the cabbages goes further than that, and finding them in a field or a field of crops, that actually goes back to King Herod when he was out looking for Jesus. They say that he was put in sorry, beg your pardon, when he was out, yes, it was Jesus. When they were out looking, no, it's Moses I'm thinking of, isn't it? Sorry. King Herod was looking for, help me, Sam, I've lost the plot.
I thought you said Moses.
Yeah, King Herod is looking for the newborn Messiah, isn't he? So he's looking for Jesus. And didn't they say that they hid him in the rushes or something? Or am I thinking of Moses?
I believe so. I mean, I've got your book here. I can double check it, but I can't remember off the top of my head now. Now you've put it on me.
So King, that period of time, he was looking for a baby, no, yes, gone blank. I've gone blank.
That's okay.
So they're looking for King Herod is looking for a boy, a baby boy that's just been born. And so they hid, all of these baby boys were hid in the crop fields, all of these children, because he was going out and killing all the baby boys that were born. So they were hidden, and they were hidden in crop fields. Now, the old story, the biblical story says that they were hidden in the bulrushes on the riverbanks, but they weren't. They were actually hidden within crop fields. And that's where it comes from. The babies were then collected again from the vegetation, from these crop fields, and slowly it's become cabbages. Interestingly enough, outside a maternity ward in a city called Tomsk in Russia is a statue called I'm Anna, or Im Anna, Imanna. And that is a statue of a cabbage with a baby inside it. And so this is very much Slavic folklore, and that's what they said. And the other interesting thing with it is that, and of course, it's Jesus that we're talking about, isn't it? It was Moses, wasn't it? It was Moses. It was Moses that was hidden. Yeah, that's right. Moses was hidden. Sorry, I don't know why I was saying Jesus. But I have been. This is the third podcast I've done today, so I'm a little bit.
A bit knackered. I can get that.
Out. The first one was 6 o'clock. Yeah, I was up at 6 doing. Yeah. So the cabbage thing is interesting because there became Cabbage Night, and Cabbage Night was the night, that slowly became Halloween. And what girls would do is they would go into a cabbage patch, and this was when somebody was actually growing their own veg on their own land. So if they had a little allotment or whatever, people back then were growing their own fruit and veg. And what the girls would do is they'd go into the cabbage patch, take a cabbage, and the quality of the cabbage determined the quality of their future husband. And if the cabbage looked good and it wasn't rotten, then they were going to have a good. They would marry well, essentially. And then they had to throw it at the front door of the house from which they took the cabbage, stole the cabbage from, and that became your trick or treat, the prank. And Cabbage Night slowly, it was also known as Mischief Night, Ragamuffin Night. That slowly became Halloween, and the cabbage slowly became a pumpkin. So it's steeped in history, and you've got these different. There's also there's also a Celtic element to it. They also celebrated it as well. So it's lots of different cultures that brought the theory of the Cabbage Patch baby and babies being born in cabbages. That starts out as Slavic. It then goes into Celtic mythology and legend, and then ultimately becomes something that everybody still celebrates today, especially in America, being Halloween. And the reason that they used to say that storks delivered babies was because storks would mate, and then they would go away. They would migrate, and they used to mate around the same time every year, and they would come back in spring and actually give birth then. And so people would typically marry and reproduce. They would say on Midsummer's Eve, and that's when the storks would migrate, and the storks would come back 9 months later. So when the storks returned to the city in Russia, that would be the same time that you would expect children to be born. So that's why they said that the stork delivered the babies, because the stork coming back from its migration was a sign that the people that had conceived 9 months earlier were going to give birth any time now. And that's a story by Hans Christian Andersen. Again, old folklore.
Yeah.
But those two things are connected. So, and I've written about it in the book, and in a lot more detail than I've just given, and hopefully in a far better way of explaining it as well.
Gives people more reason to buy the book, to look into it, though.
Yeah.
So no, it's really interesting when you do look at that, and when you actually do have it, actually do deep it, 'cause it's an interesting sort of folklore that he's come up with, Anderson. It's quite a deep meaning behind it as well. Let's talk about the Orphan train movement, which is with the Oddfellows you've gotten down. It's interesting because it's P.T. Barnum, the founding member of the Oddfellows. What's it, The Greatest Showman, isn't it? If I got that wrong.
Yeah, that's him. And Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman is his known these days. I mean, obviously, I'm sure you went to see that, didn't you? Didn't you go to see that in London?
No, not London. No, just back in Leicester, just at cinema. But
right.
Yeah, so talking about how, founding member of the Oddfellows, and what they would do is they used railway network to send kids to the Midwest. Yeah. Which is very interesting. Why?
And always when P.T. Barnum, it's worth having a look at his house. It was sort of the Iranian embassy, or the Iranian temple. The place that he lived was clearly Tartarian, and I think that was given to him as a result of what he'd done with the Orphan train movement. But the Orphan train movement was massive, and that was taking children allegedly from New York, and I think that's a combination of the orphans from New York and children that had come over from overseas that had been transported by ship to America. They enter America through New York, and then a series of train routes are in place to distribute them to become the new workforce. And interestingly enough, there is a massive link between the Oddfellows and the Freemasons. And what would happen was these children would get to their destination, and they'd be put on display always outside the local Masonic lodge, and asked to perform, do anything they could, sing, dance, anything they could, in hope of getting a new owner. Now, there was no adoption. There was no paperwork. There was nothing like that. And often these children would be bought and sold from farm to farm, or from mine to farm, or factory to farm, and so on. And they very rarely kept siblings together. They had no problem splitting them up.
Yeah.
And new name, taught a new language, and these kids knew nothing.
It's incredible. And from what I've understood as well about the Cabbage Patch Kids, or the babies, they were used to repopulate after the reset of 1776 and the fall of the Tartarian Empire. And thousands and thousands of babies were distributed across the Northern Hemisphere. And like you say, it doesn't matter where they go, it doesn't matter who takes them, siblings or not, twins, whoever, as long as they're just using them to repopulate. And I do understand, and to some sort of degree, I can believe that incubators were used as well. I mean, you see it with like The Matrix. They even done it with that, creating babies from scratch. You see it in other films as well, a lot of subliminal messaging. And with the technology we have, and the technology that's been hidden from us, it seems more likely than not that they could have had that ability to do it. And from high beings or anything like that, high civilizations back before, the technology we could have learned from them, we really could achieve a lot. And incubators, it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what's happened. And you can see it now. They've done it recently, talked about it. Hey, you don't need to have sex anymore. You can they've got these incubators now where you just have to pay however much money. And there you go, you've got a baby.
Yeah,
good to go.
Absolutely. And I think that if you look into the incubator babies that were introduced by Martin Cooney at the World's Fairs, and this is where Alice Guy, the filmmaker, got her inspiration from. If you look into it, then they're saying that the babies that were on show in the London World's Fair, they were on loan from a maternity hospital in Paris, on loan. And that all of the ones in America were on loan from maternity hospitals in New York. What are they talking about? Where did they manage to find all of these premature babies, enough to have world's fairs and exhibitions all over the world? And they're transporting these babies from Paris to London and from New York to places like St. Louis and Chicago. And what's going on here? It defies any sort of logic, really, that you could do that. And we're talking about a massive number of babies as well. So, and bear in mind that 1 minute they're telling us that these babies are on loan from maternity hospitals, and in the same breath, these babies are for sale. They were actually available to buy. So what are we talking about here? And an incredible amount of twins and triplets too, which is often a sign of fertility treatment of one form or another. The incubator babies was what also known as I think that and the Cabbage Patch babies are the same thing. That's what we're talking about there, cloning. A lab pumping out. And of course, ultimately, that for many of us, that they're our ancestors. That is as far back as your family tree goes. There's nothing beyond that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when you think about that and how that's where some families sort of begin. It's very interesting.
Most begin there. Yeah.
Now, just because of time wise, I want to get into this next point, and it's also the other part of your name of your book, Tesla, Nikola Tesla. So obviously you have a chapter in there dedicated to Tesla. So let's talk about the link between Tesla and the Tartarian Empire. What's the connection there? Because I know there's mention of it in the book about the Tesla coil and his work with that. So what else? Yeah, what's the link there between them two?
Well, first of all, as I said earlier on, that the Tartarian Empire was known by many names, but one of them was the Empire of Free Energy. And they were masters at harnessing energy from the ether, which it appears the Egyptians or Anunnaki were obviously at the forefront of and had perfected a long time ago. So the Tartarians were harnessing energy from the ether. Now, Tesla, they say Nikola Tesla's aim ultimately was to provide energy free of charge throughout the world. And nobody really wanted that to happen, but that was what he was secretly working on. Even when J.P. Morgan was backing him when he was trying to send the first radio signal across the Atlantic, that was what he was secretly working on. So there are a few different schools of thought here. One is that Nikola Tesla was reverse engineering Tartarian technology that he had found. Another one is that he was able to communicate with beings of a higher dimension that were sharing this information with him, because he used to say that he had premonitions. He never used to have to write anything down. Everything was in his mind, perfectly detailed. The third one is he never existed at all. And he's a name given to certain inventions that were discovered and perfected and reverse engineered that were old Tartarian technology and then slowly introduced over a period of time. So you've got three trains of thought. The one that backs up the strangest of them all, that Nikola Tesla didn't exist, is the fact that if you go onto the internet, you'll only find 2 or 3 photographs of him. And normally the photograph we see of him is the one on my front cover of my book. It's actually a slight side angle of him, and the larger picture is him sat in a chair next to his Tesla tower.
Yeah, I think you've got one with him with a group of people as well. I think I've seen.
Yeah, there's an older one. There's an older one of him. Yeah, and you'll see him at certain points of his life, 2 certain points of his life. One when he appears to be in his mid-30s, and the other towards the end of his life. In fact, it's the last photograph they know that was taken of him. There's nothing else. Now, this man was a pioneer in technology. So why is there video footage or movie footage of Einstein, but nothing of Tesla?
Yeah.
So I keep asking people this. If he existed, and I'm not saying he didn't, but I'm saying that there are a lot of people that say he didn't exist. If he did exist, can someone please send me a link of video footage of him? This is a man that we are told was the most intelligent man that existed. Einstein considered him to be superior in his ability and knowledge to Einstein himself. Yet we cannot find a single bit of video footage of him. Now, if all of his documents were stolen from the Hotel New Yorker when he died, what documents are they talking about if Tesla said he never had to write anything down? Now, these won't be copies of the patents because they're in the public domain. He wouldn't need to keep those. Something that somebody required Donald Trump's Uncle John and a renowned safecracker got into that hotel room and wanted access to the safe and took all of his files away. What files are we talking about here?
Yeah.
If he never had to write anything down because everything was memorized in very detailed, perfectly, and every experiment he ever did worked first time exactly as he planned it would. So that's a bit of a weird one. So again, that's something else that I sit on the fence with.
That is interesting.
Did he exist or didn't he? If he did exist, who was Kevin? Where was he getting this knowledge from? And was he actually, if he did exist, was he reverse engineering Tartarian technology? So the reason for using that the name for the book is it's important that people understand that, you know, perhaps the most popular and most famous tech man now is probably Elon Musk. He's probably someone that most people love or hate. But more people would admire, you know, his freedom of speech with the X platform, the way he's so outspoken, and the technology and the things he's trying to achieve with X and so on, and SpaceX, and the vehicles. So strange that he's called them Tesla, that the company's called Tesla. But, you know, first of all, that's a little bit odd. And when you consider that he's very friendly with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's uncle apparently stole Tesla's files. And the ones that he kept hold of were particular to time travel. Yeah. So you've got this whole weird thing. So hence earlier on saying is Elon Musk Nikola Tesla? Did Nikola Tesla even exist? If he did exist, where was he getting this information from? And was he just reverse engineering Tartarian technology? And Tartarian technology would be technology that goes all the way back to the pyramids and how they were harnessing energy too. So there's always been a way of harnessing energy from the ether. It's just been occulted and hidden from us because nobody wants us to have free energy. I mean, look at what they're doing with the weather and how cloudy it's been, and the strange formations being created by planes flying backwards and forwards in the sky, and then a beautiful blue sky suddenly becoming clouded over. At the same time as people getting solar panels fitted and solar farms being installed all over the world. You know, they want us to go solar and rely on the sun at the same time blocking the sun. So ultimately, that we'll continue trying to do the right thing, but relying on fossil fuel. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, the three theories, especially about him not even existing, is quite an interesting one. I think people probably want to look into that themselves. I find it interesting how a part of what you've wrote about him in the book is about having contact with a electromagnetic charge, and it sort of put him outside his time frame. and claimed he was able to see the past, present, and future simultaneously. So maybe, possibly, if he did exist, maybe seeing the past, he was able to get some sort of wisdom or knowledge from that, from the Tartarian Empire, being able to see how they functioned as a society. Maybe he got some of the knowledge from that. But time travel thing's interesting. Do you reckon, if he did exist, do you reckon maybe he time traveled? Do you reckon that's a possibility? It's a tough one.
Apparently it's possible. I mean, people have said that it is possible. People that have worked on this have said that, what Tesla was looking into is possible, and scientists agree that in theory it is possible to travel back. Now, whether or not you can travel in the future, I don't know, but they say that it is possible to travel back. But then, of course, you've got things like, I don't know if I'm sure you have heard about the chronovisor that they say the Vatican has, where that's a machine that gives you the ability to see events that have happened in the past. So we must be talking about some sort of very similar technology there. But as for time travel, I think I remember watching Superman, where he wanted to rewrite something that had happened. So he flew so quickly the wrong way, anti-clockwise around the planet, that he was able to go back before it happened and stop it from happening. And then, of course, we got the film Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox and so on. So I often wonder, do Hollywood put this stuff out there because they want to show us that this is what we're capable of and this is the technology we've got, just so they're showing us. So they're not hiding anything, but because it's in a movie, it comes across as being fiction. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it possible to time travel? People far more intelligent than me that have studied this say, yes, it is in theory possible. Whether or not anybody's done it, I don't know. But there are a lot of people out there, a lot of famous people that appear to have doppelgangers, which is interesting because, being a German name, and of course kindergarten, children's garden, again German. I mean, are we talking there about repopulation? But it's interesting that if you type in doppelganger, celebrity doppelganger, there are a lot of famous people like Bruce Willis, Jay-Z, Eminem that have that people have found very old photographs of people that look identical, and I mean completely identical. Now, some say that that's because there are only so many shapes of a face you can have, but I'm talking about you would think it was them, that close, not just similar. So I don't know. I don't know. Is this the result of cloning? Are there people that look so similar because they often clone the same mold, if you like, and the same ingredients, and they're popping out people who do look very similar, quite often through Hollywood? Or is it because people have time traveled? I don't know, but there's some good ones out there. Bruce Willis, John Travolta, Eminem, Jay-Z. There are a few out there which you can Google. You can even go onto Google, and I put it in the book. You can go onto Google and find your own doppelganger, your own double. There is a program on Google to do that, so you can find people out there that look exactly like you. And I think that is because ultimately we come from only a few generations back cloning.
Yeah, especially when you see, kind of a side topic, but you see people that don't even age, especially celebrities. But if we're going to touch, that's probably touching on adrenochrome, but we don't need to get into that. So we don't need to get into that too much right now. But so obviously we talked quite a lot about your book. So what is next for you? What are your future plans with future books? I imagine.
Well, the book is 16 chapters long. And what I wanted to do was give people a little bit of information on each area, the things leading up to the reset, who these people were, how they lived, what they did, and then what happened after they fell, and leading up to today, and giving people a full circle, really, a loop, and showing you what happened in 1776, the reset there, leading up to the reset going on now, and that's where it concludes. But that's the reason I've just given little bits of information on each area is because it would have been the size of a bloody encyclopedia if I had have gone into depth. And I wanted to then follow up with a series of books that focus on each specific area. So my next one is the A to Z of Tartarian cities, where I'm going to give people, for example, A's for Antwerp. And I want to give people a specific city in most major cities in the world, where they can go and actually look for themselves. And chances are, wherever you live in the world or wherever you go on holiday, if you travel, then there'll be somewhere that you can go and look for yourself. And I pick apart the narrative. So they might say that Joe Bloggs was the architect for this. But where they fall down is that they'll also give credit to that architect for several other buildings. And that's where you can trip them up. Because I did it recently in Exeter. There's a building in Exeter, a museum, an art museum in Exeter. And I had a look to see, because I can see it's Tartarian. So I looked to see who the architect was. And it all stacked up, the dates line up. So I decided to look at what else this person had done. And they'd given him credit for a monument that was in a churchyard in Devon. And I had a look at the date the monument was installed. He was 12 years old.
Wow.
So they slip up. They'll get carried away, and they'll give one particular, and they do this all the time. Most places in America and Australia, even more so, they'll give one architect the credit for so much. And they'll say, well, this was his style of building, and he won the contract for this, and this. And one of them won't add up. And in Australia, I found the first government building in Sydney. They gave that credit to the architects, and the architects and designers of the building were given, the credit was given to someone from the military who had no experience whatsoever in doing anything like that. And the other person they gave credit to, they made a slight mistake with, because when this building, the first government building, I think it's called First Customs House in Sydney, right, when that was actually erected or founded, but when they say that it was erected, he was still on a ship on his way to Australia as a convict. So, how he managed to design a building while he was on a boat as a prisoner on his way to Australia, and by the time he gets there, the thing's already been built, and then he's given with the credit of being the architect of it, defies all, I mean, we're now talking time travel again, aren't we?
That's very odd.
Yeah, and that's where they slip up. So that's what I'm going to give people, the A to Z of Tartarian towns and cities. But I have been asked to ghostwrite a book for somebody.
Oh wow!
And that's about frequency cymatics and really what churches and cathedrals are about and how frequency works. I'm also looking at a couple of other things as well. But there is part of me that wants to jump straight into the whole reproduction and actually not do the Tartarian cities book first and actually go straight into the cloning of the Cabbage Patch Kids, the Orphan trains, and so on. Yeah. Because I think that's more gritty. But people that I've spoken to, Richard Vobes actually for one, he says that no, you should do the Tartarian cities. So I started a campaign on Kickstarter recently to see if I could generate enough money to actually self-publish rather than having to go through Amazon again, because the downfall with Amazon publishing is that bookstores won't take it, I guess on the basis that your local shop doesn't want to buy its stock from Tesco's and actually be supporting its biggest competitor. And that is what Amazon is to independent bookstores. Yeah. So by independently publishing, I can then get it into bookshops. So that's what I've been doing. But so yeah, at the moment, Sam, it's Tartarian towns and cities, an A to Z. But I'm in two minds. I'm leaning towards actually putting something out there that's a lot more shocking.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's a tough
yeah.
one. I mean, you got to go with your heart, go with your gut, and see what you're feeling. But both, I think, were very interesting. I think the
Yeah.
nitty gritty with the repopulation, the babies, I think that'll really strike some people, and they'll see the truth of it and see some really
Yeah.
interesting points that they may have not thought of
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. And if, give it some sort of shocking title, like your ancestors were clones, or your
That'll
family
grab people's
tree's a
attention.
lie, or ancestry.com, the fake history, or the problem with ancestry, or something, I don't know, something, but something gritty. But before I do that, I keep getting reminded that I need to do the audio book for that, because not everybody wants to sit and read anymore, which is a real shame. But
It is.
I understand that. And your brother Tom, he's often said, I don't want to read the book, but if you do an audio book, I'll listen to that while I'm in the gym. And I get it. We're so busy now doing things that we don't need to be bloody doing, that we don't have time to sit down and read anymore. And we get in from work, we put the TV on, we veg out, and reading to an extent is becoming a bit of a dying art. So I've got to get the information out there to as many people as possible. So I think I do need to concentrate on doing an audio book before I make my decision on what I'm writing next.
Yeah, I think the audiobook's a good idea, but even people like Tom, I mean, you can just I think the problem is people want to rush it straight away. They just want to get through it as quickly as they can. Whereas you just start off with literally put it on your bed every time you wake up. And that way, when you go to bed, it's on there, on your pillow, and you can see it and go, okay, 10 minutes, I'm good to go. After 10 minutes, doesn't matter how many pages I get through, I'll read 10 minutes and then I can put it aside, go to bed, and just repeat that. Even if you want to do 20 minutes, 5 minutes, just at least you're getting it in, and you can properly take it in. And it's something it's like a little habit you can have. So, but like you said, I think, because of people like Tom, the audiobook's probably a good idea as well. And like you say, it can reach more people, which is what you want. Yeah. I mean, you're smashing it already, though. You've gotten a lot of copies out there. I mean, obviously, we're going to do a little auction. Well, not auction per se, but a little competition with this one. So for those that are watching, so this will be the 1,000th copy of Tesla.
Yes, 1,000 today.
Yeah. So Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, this will be 1,000 copy, and it will be for free. But all you have to do is subscribe to this channel, like it, leave a comment, and then we'll pick out a winner as well. The more details will be on the description, though, in the YouTube page. But we'll get that sorted, and that will get all posted, and we'll get someone picked out for that. But because of time, we're gonna have to cut this in a minute. But
it's obviously we've been talking for a very long time.
We have, but it's been a pleasant conversation. Obviously, talking with your dad as always, and
it's lovely talking to you.
Still lots of points we can crack on with on the next one, I'm sure. Maybe for the 2,000th copy, because I'm sure they're going quick anyway. So we'll have to get another one in soon.
Yeah, but I'd love to.
Yeah, perfect. Well, for now, I'll let you go. But thank you again, Dad, for being on. It's a pleasure and an honour, as always.
That is an honour and a pleasure to be on, Sam. So thank you. Thanks for having me back on. I really enjoyed I don't like watching myself on these things, and I cringe a bit. But I've got to say, I really did enjoy watching the little one we did in the summer, because if nothing else, first of all, it's lovely to be sat there with you in the studio for that one. But I've got to say, I don't normally like the sound of my own voice, but the quality of what you're producing there, it made it so much more tolerable. So I think that there's some podcasters out there with some massive numbers, and they're not producing anything like the quality that you're producing there. So hats off to you and everybody there behind the scenes. I think you're putting out some very, very top quality podcasts. Just the clarity, the picture and the audio is second to none. Really, really good.
Yeah, so, Stuart has done
well done.
Good. Yeah, Stuart's done an amazing job here, and with the listen to your own voice, you do get used to it. It's something not ideal at the start, as I know myself, but I've just had to get used to it. There's nothing really I can do about my voice. Can't change it too much, otherwise I start changing on him and people speak to me like, you don't sound like that.
No.
It's like, it's a bit awkward. And then you just have to sort of, this is how I sound. Can't really do much about it. Just crack on with it. But yeah. All right. Well, I'll let you go, Dad. But thank you again for being on. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam. I'll see you soon.
Yes, we'll see you soon.